Welcome to Johns Island City Park. Grab a Bible, read through Matthew 8, verses 1 through 4, and let's look and see what Jesus has for us in the passage while we play around. Matthew 8 comes right at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7, in which Jesus has just provided exceptionally authoritative teaching to the people. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has taught how the lowly will be exalted and the haughty will be made humble. He's taught on the law, showing that the heart issues of the law are so much more profound than fulfilling the letters of the law. He showed what the Christian life will look like, the spiritual disciplines that go with it. He's also shown that a transformed life comes out of a place of a renewed heart, that the good tree produces good fruit, that the strong house is built on the rock. And finally, he's done all this by teaching in a way in which he shows his authority over the word, an authority that astonishes the crowds. So when we get to Matthew 8, the concern on Matthew's mind as he's writing his account, his gospel account, is to address this question of authority that the people have noticed in Jesus' teaching. Does it extend over words only, or does it extend over something more? So Matthew 8:1 tells us that Jesus comes down from the mountain. The parallel passage in Luke 5 tells us that he's now in a city, and great crowds have followed him, looking for healing, for teaching. They're fans. Verse 2 says, "Behold, a leper came to him." The behold here is one of shock that a leper would be in this situation. After Leviticus 13 tells us all the ways to identify leprosy, tells us that the leper is to wear ragged clothes, live outside the camp, cover their faces, literally a mask mandate, and cry out, "Unclean, unclean." For a leper to appear in a crowded place inside a city, he is decidedly not where he's supposed to be. Though this leper is way outside where he's supposed to be, he's pursued Jesus in faith, and yet a great deal of humility. He comes before Jesus and kneels, literally seems to fall on the ground before Jesus. The position of the leper is one of begging, yet his words aren't really a question. They're more a profound theological statement. He says, "Lord, if you will, you can make me clean." He's confessing that his healing is not about his desires or wants, but it's about whether or not Jesus wants to. Paul echoes this statement in Romans 9. Verse 3 tells us that Jesus responds by stretching out his hand, by touching him, by saying, "I will be clean." The parallel passage in Mark 1 tells us that Jesus was moved with pity. He chooses to heal this man who had probably not been touched by another human being for years, if not decades. Jesus chooses to heal this man through both his words and a touch. He didn't have to touch him. The next healing in Matthew shows that he didn't even have to see him to heal him. And yet Jesus is so kind and compassionate. The touch that should have made Jesus unclean, in fact, makes this man clean. Jesus is so holy that he can cleanse with a word and a touch, because he wants to. He willed it. Jesus then gives the man a couple of instructions. First, he says to tell no one. Jesus isn't interested in building a following. And in fact, this man disobeys that, and a huge following gathers. Secondly, Jesus tells him to go to the temple and offer the gifts according to Moses to the priest as a proof to them. Jesus is using this as an opportunity to love the priests, to care for them, to prove many things. His instruction is there to prove to the priests that he's there to fulfill, not abolish, the Old Testament law. Jesus is proving that he has the authority and the power to cleanse the leper. Jesus is also proving to the priests that they are not that high above the rest of the people. Leviticus 14 tells us that the ceremony for cleansing a leper, which by the way would not have happened very often because lepers were rarely cleansed, involved taking the sacrifice and the blood and placing it on the right earlobe, the right thumb, and the right big toe of the leper, requiring the priest to touch the leper and also marking them in a way very peculiar. That's all in Leviticus 14. Leviticus 8 tells us that the ordination of the high priest involved this same marking. It's the only two places. The highest in their society, the high priest, and the lowest, the leper that had been excluded, would both bear the marks of blood of the guilt offering on their right earlobe, their right thumb, and their right big toe. Ultimately, Jesus ends up taking the place of the leper. The leper's invited into the covenant community for the first time in years, even as Jesus has to retreat to the desolate places, not to be overcome by the crowds. So I hope today we'll move beyond the astonishment of the crowds, that will love the compassion of Jesus, that will receive his proof. Rejoice in the Lord, keep meditating on his word. Join me next time.